What if the person you underestimated held the keys to your entire world? Elias Kane leaned back in the creaky chair of the break room, the fluorescent lights buzzing above like a swarm of judgmental insects. The air smelled of stale coffee and the faint tang of printer ink. It was Friday, 6:47 p.m., and the office was nearly empty, save for the hum of a distant vacuum cleaner and the clack of keyboards from the few stragglers chasing deadlines. Elias, a data analyst in his mid-30s, was used to these late hours. He didn't mind the quiet, it gave him space to think, to plan. But tonight, his boss, Victor Hargrove, had other plans for him. Victor stormed into the break room, his face a storm cloud of impatience. A man in his late 40s with a perpetually slicked-back hairstyle and a tie that screamed, "I'm in charge," Victor had a reputation for ruling the office like a petty king. "Elias," he barked, tossing a memo onto the table, "you're on for weekend shifts starting tomorrow. 12 hours, Saturday and Sunday. No excuses." Elias glanced at the memo, its bolded text demanding compliance. He pushed his glasses up his nose, his hazel eyes steady. "I've told you, Victor, I don't work weekends. I have commitments." His voice was calm, almost too calm, like the still air before a thunderstorm. Victor scoffed, his lips curling into a sneer. "Commitments? You're a number cruncher, Elias, not a brain surgeon. You'll work when I say you work, or you're out. This isn't a negotiation." The room felt smaller, the air heavier. Elias didn't flinch. He folded his hands, his silence louder than Victor's bluster. "I'll pass," he said simply. Victor's face reddened. "Pass? You don't pass on me. You're fired, Kane. Pack your desk and get out by Monday." He turned on his heel, muttering about entitled millennials as he stormed out. Elias sat there, the memo still untouched. A faint smile tugged at his lips, not out of arrogance but something deeper, something Victor couldn't possibly understand. He didn't need this job. He didn't need Victor's approval. Because Elias Kane wasn't just a data analyst. He was the silent owner of the entire building they worked in. It hadn't always been this way. 10 years ago, Elias was scraping by, a kid from a rough neighborhood who clawed his way through college on scholarships and sheer grit. His parents had worked multiple jobs, their hands calloused from labor, teaching him the value of quiet resilience. When he stumbled into real estate investment after a lucky break, a small inheritance from a distant uncle, played the long game. He bought properties, flipped them, and reinvested. By 30, he'd acquired the sleek, 20-story office tower that housed Pinnacle Analytics, the company where he now worked as a low-key analyst. Why work here at all? Because Elias wanted to understand the people who filled his building, to stay grounded, to never forget where he came from. But Victor didn't know any of this. To him, Elias was just another cog in the machine, expendable and replaceable. The weekend passed quietly. Elias spent it with his sister, Maya, helping her organize a community art fair in their old neighborhood. It was the kind of commitment Victor would never understand, time spent building something bigger than himself. On Monday morning, Elias returned to the office, not to pack his desk but to set things in motion. The office buzzed with its usual Monday chaos, phones ringing, printers jamming, coffee mugs clinking. Elias slipped into his cubicle, unnoticed by most. But then, a new face appeared, a woman in her early 50s, sharply dressed, with a no-nonsense air. She introduced herself as Clara Voss, a consultant hired by the building's owner to assess operations. Whispers spread like wildfire. Was the company being sold? Were layoffs coming? Victor, predictably, puffed out his chest, assuming he'd charm Clara into securing his position. Clara spent the day observing, her clipboard a silent judge. She asked pointed questions about workflows, employee morale, and management practices. Victor's answers were slick but hollow, filled with corporate buzzwords like synergy and optimization. Elias watched from his cubicle, his expression unreadable. That afternoon, Clara called a staff meeting. The conference room was packed, the air thick with anxiety. Victor stood at the front, arms crossed, exuding confidence. Clara stepped forward, her voice clear and commanding. "I've spent the day reviewing Pinnacle Analytics operations," she began. "And I've found significant issues with leadership, specifically, a culture of intimidation and disregard for employee well-being." Victor's smile faltered. "Now, hold on," he interjected. "We're a results-driven team. Some people just can't handle the pressure." His eyes flicked to Elias, a pointed jab. Clara didn't flinch. "Results don't justify toxicity, Mr. Hargrove. Effective leadership builds trust, not fear. I've spoken with the building's owner, and they've decided to make changes starting with you." The room gasped. Victor's face drained of color. "You can't fire me," he stammered. "I've been here for years." Clara raised an eyebrow. "The owner disagrees. You're terminated, effective immediately." As security escorted a sputtering Victor out, the room erupted in murmurs. Elias remained silent, his heart pounding not with triumph but with a strange mix of relief and responsibility. Clara approached him after the meeting, her voice low. "Mr. Kane, the owner would like a word." The twist came later that evening, in a quiet office on the top floor. Clara wasn't just a consultant, she was Elias's mentor, the real estate mogul who'd guided him through his first property deals years ago. She'd come at his request, not to expose him but to help him decide what to do next. "You can't keep hiding, Elias," she said, her eyes sharp but kind. "You own this building, this company's future. It's time to step up or step back." Elias leaned against the window, the city skyline sprawling below. Clara's words hit hard. He'd stayed in the shadows to avoid the spotlight, to keep his life simple. But Victor's cruelty wasn't unique. Elias had seen it in other managers, other companies. Owning the building gave him power, but power unused was just weight. The next morning, Elias called a staff meeting. The team gathered, still reeling from Victor's exit. Elias stood at the front, no longer the quiet analyst but a man with a quiet fire in his eyes. "I owe you all an explanation," he began. "I'm not just an analyst. I'm the owner of this building and, by extension, Pinnacle Analytics." Jaws dropped. Whispers turned to stunned silence. Elias continued, his voice steady but warm. "I stayed quiet because I wanted to understand you, to work beside you. But I've seen what happens when power is misused. That stops now. This company will value your time, your ideas, your lives. No more weekend shifts unless you choose them. No more fear." The room erupted in applause, but Elias felt no thrill of victory. He felt the weight of responsibility. Over the next weeks, he worked with Clara to restructure the company. They promoted empathetic leaders, introduced flexible schedules, and funded community projects like Maya's Art Fair. Elias didn't take a corner office, he stayed at his cubicle, a reminder to himself that power didn't mean distance. Victor, meanwhile, faded into obscurity, his resume stained by his own arrogance. Elias never saw him again, but he didn't need to. The lesson wasn't about revenge, it was about building something better. Years later, Pinnacle Analytics thrived, not just in profits but in people. Employees spoke of the quiet owner, the man who turned a cold corporation into a community. Elias never forgot his roots, his parents' calloused hands, or the neighborhood that shaped him. He'd been fired for standing his ground, but in doing so, he'd reclaimed something far greater, a chance to make a difference, not just for himself, but for everyone who called his building home. What if the person you underestimated was building a better world all along?